Well, I'm glad to see you all here, and I know from experience from what you guys have said, that quite a few of you have actually read one or more of the Little House books by Laura. I see something. Laura Ingalls Wilder, which I read. I don't know what age I was, but let's say 10 or 12. I'm not sure. There's 8 of them, and I think what happened is I went to the District Heights, Maryland library. It was a little building and 4 rooms. And the main room is where you checked out your books. But there was a children's room, a small children's room, not too many books, but I must have found one of them and took it home one summer. So I remember a sunny summer reading the Little House books. So the Little House books are written by a woman named Garrison. She was born in 1867, and her life was on the frontier. She moved from one place to another and finally did settle. She and her family were she started out around 5. Anyway, they finally settled at the end in South Dakota. So they're, it was so interesting that each place was different people came up in the stories, but of course her family stayed the same. And so she herself was considered to be in the first book about 5 years old, 5 months old. Yeah. So it was a lot about family life in the frontier. Let's see. I want to mention also. Okay, so I discovered things. And then when my kids were growing up, I'm sure I must have introduced it to them, because then when we took a driving trip back east, we stopped and we met South Dakota, the center of it. And we found some of the places that were involved with Laura, one of the schoolhouses she worked at. And we slept that night in this big field. And it was, once you got out of the tent, you looked over to see the 5 trees that Pa, that was the father, had planted for his 5 girls, his wife and his 4 daughters. So anyhow, so we were there. And also they had a attached of one of the books. So that's sort of how I got started. Later, I probably also introduced them to the kids at the Fairlawn Library where I worked. And the very first book is this one. I did not read, I didn't read all of the books. But I did manage, I was so lucky that I was looking last week at a library book sale. And so I managed to get 2 of them. I couldn't buy 30, but I already had 1. So those are the ones I tended to have actually read, but I looked up stuff to remind my little boy. Okay, so the Little House in the Big Woods is the first one, and the Big Woods are in Wisconsin. Probably the Big Woods have changed a lot since what this story says about them. But I just want to read the very introduction so you get some idea of what their life when she was quite young was like. So the little girl skipping and running in the front is Laura, and then there's another girl, a little more than Papa, just a little bit older, who's her sister Mary, and then her mom and dad are walking behind. She also at this time had a baby sister. Okay, this is the beginning of Little House in the Big Woods. Once upon a time, 60 years ago, so it was written in 1932. So it was in 1970. Once upon a time, 60 years ago, a little girl lived in the big woods of Wisconsin in a little gray house made of logs. The great dark trees of Big Woods stood all around the house, and beyond them were other trees, and beyond them were more trees, as far as a man could go to the north in a day, or a week, or a whole month. There was nothing but woods. There were no houses. There were no roads. There were no people. There were only trees and the wild animals who had their homes among them. Wolves lived in the big woods, and bears, and huge wildcats. Muskrats and mink and otter lived by the stream.
foxes and had dens in the hills, and deer roamed everywhere. So far as the little girl could see, there was only the one little house where she lived with her father and mother, her sister Mary, and baby sister Carrie. A wagon track ran before the house, turning and twisting out of sight in the woods where the wild animals lived. But the little girl did not know where it went, nor what might be at the end of it. The little girl was named Laura, and she called her father Pa and her mother Ma. In those days, in that place, children did not say father and mother, nor mama and papa, as they do now. At night, when Laura lay awake in the trundle bed, she listened and could not hear anything at all but the sound of the trees whispering together. Sometimes far away in the night, a wolf howled. Then he came nearer and howled again. It was a scary sound. Laura knew that wolves would eat little girls, but she was safe inside the solid walls. Her father's gun hung over the door, and good old Jack, the brindle bulldog, lay on guard before her. Her father would say, "Go to sleep, Laura. Jack won't let the wolf in." So Laura snuggled under the covers of the trundle bed, close beside Mary, and went to sleep. One night, her father picked her up out of bed and carried her to the window so that she might see the wolves. There were two of them sitting in the back. They looked like shaggy dogs. They pointed their noses at the big bright moon and howled. Jack paced up and down before the door, growling. The hair stood up along his back, and he showed his sharp, fierce teeth to the wolves. They howled, but they could not get him. It's like it's so almost unimaginable for us to imagine being in a place where you're so surrounded by no people, no houses, just trees. So this is the beginning story. And in this story, I'd like to say the Pa spends most of his time out hunting and setting traps. And the mom and the girls do stuff around the house, right? And at night, this is like a wonderful, outstanding part of the story to me. Often, not always, plays his fiddle. And he plays all sorts of stuff. In the books, they tell you the words to the song. And some of them you know the tunes to, but others never heard some of the others, right? Yeah. So that is the first book. After this book comes the one whose name is most famous. But don't count it. You just saw it on TV. It's not the same thing. The second book about Laura. This is a little house on the prairie. They take a covered wagon to Kansas. They don't call it Kansas in the book, they call it Indian territory. It took a while to figure out where it truly was, but it was Kansas. And, built their house, had their little life. But it turned out it was truly Indian territory, Osage Indian property. And so they didn't get to stay too long. And they had to leave for their next spot, the book that came out in 1935, that was Little House on the Prairie, came out in 35. Okay. You might have to wait. Okay. Well, the next one was on the banks of Plum Creek, where they actually lived inside a dugout next to the creek. And so it's quite an adventurous story. Actually, Pa builds them a house pretty quick. Pa is quite the worker. They go to school in Plum Creek for the first time. And among other things, there's a plague of grasshoppers and there's a blizzard. I just want to go, before I mention any of the other books, there's so many things that happen in these books that are, well, they're hard on families. They don't happen to us. Mostly we don't have malaria, diphtheria, or scarlet fever, which when all those things went to these families. Plus, living here, we don't have blizzards. We very rarely have a plague of grasshoppers or a plague of crows or a plague of locusts. And so they went through all these things. And they also had, just normal stuff like crop failure and debt. Of course, some of the crop failure was caused by the plague, right? Okay. Then, in fact, there is one whole place that they lived that they never mentioned in any of the books. Apparently, Iowa's a bad place. I'm sure it's a good place, but yeah. And they never, Laura never mentioned that they lived for a while in Iowa. They had bad luck there. They were quite poor, and even the kids were pretty young then. They had to be sent out to do domestic work at the hotel. And when the time came to leave, Pa came in the middle of the night and woke the kids up and said, "We're leaving now." He was getting away from his death. So that particular story is not mentioned. Also, what may have happened in this place, or at the end of one of the other places, was a brother was born to the family who didn't last very long and died. Another bad thing about the scarlet fever is everybody in the family except Paul and Laura got scarlet fever at one time. I'm not saying Iowa. I lost track of where, but somewhere. They don't mention this in the books, by the way, where it is or how it happened. But Mary, the older daughter, lost her sight, so she was blind from then on. They don't say that until the next book, which was, who knows what it was, by the shores of Silver Lake. And Silver Lake is actually in South Dakota, so they've arrived to an area relatively close to this map. And so Mary's blindness is mentioned, and Pa tells Laura that she should be Mary's eye. And so this apparently has quite an influence on her life. I mean, she does that. She prescribes everything to Mary. She takes everything is with Mary. But she comments later in something that she wrote that she thought that helped her when she was writing the books, because she had already said it all out loud to somebody, right? Until it stuck maybe in her head. Okay, so they're now in the South Dakota area, and comes my favorite book. I don't know what this says about me. It was printed, first came out in 1940. So then it came out from 1932 to like 1941. Yeah, every couple of years it came out. So The Long Winter, which truly was a very serious winter in the South Dakota area. It's on record everywhere. And they mentioned before they actually get to the winter, they know it's coming because the muskrats have built bigger walls in their homes. And an old Indian comes to town and says that the winter will be 7 months long. The blizzards will last for 7 months. And so the first blizzard hits in October. And so it's a very long, cold winter with so much snow. And they go back and forth between their land and town. But for the winter they know is coming, they move to town. And soon everyone in the town is having trouble with getting enough food and enough fuel to keep their fires and stuff. And I remember the picture and the description of Laura and her dad getting the hay and twisting hay into kind of like, we'll pretend they're like logs or something to burn in the fire. So they did that. Another thing I think as a child that made me think about it, like, oh my goodness, they put some sort of rope, I'll say rope, but I'm not sure exactly what, from the house out to the barn so they could get out there and take care of the cow and horses. So, so that they wouldn't starve too. Because of the blizzard, they couldn't see going on, right? So in this book is introduced for the first time Almanzo Wilder, who is the one who becomes Laura's husband sometime in the future, not yet. Okay, and he and his friend leave town in one of the many blizzards to get food, basically, and come back with wheat. And so basically time, Laura is about 13 years old at the end of the long winter. Okay. And there's two more books that take place also in this map, a little town on the prairie, and these happy golden years. They have lots of things happen, but I don't want to tell you too much because it might go on too long. Okay, I've been warned about this. Okay, so I'll just mention that in these books, Laura goes to school. Almanzo starts getting really interested in her and takes her home from church in his buggy. So she doesn't quite understand. She's just glad to get a buggy. She likes that a lot. And she takes the test, the teaching test, okay? She takes that when she's 14. She gets her first school when she's 14, turning 15. So then she's sent out in the middle of the winter, 12 miles away, to this little rooster settlement. And the people, not the people there, but the wife of the family, the mother or father of the little boy, she has to stay with them, right? Because there's only like 3 or 4 houses in the settlement. The wife of the family is very unfriendly to her, probably because she's very unhappy in South Dakota. She doesn't want to be there. And she wants to go back, but nevertheless, she treats everybody back, including Laura. So Laura is so happy when at the end of the first week, Almanzo comes in his sleigh to take her back to town to live with. And then on Sunday, takes her to Rooster Settlement. So it turns out he does that every week, the time that so she should be catching on. I think it takes her a while. After all, she is only 15. Almanzo is way old. She thinks of him as her father. Okay. So let's see. But anyway, when they come back, Almanzo continues that interest continues. Sleigh rides, and then in the summer, buggy rides, and singing school. We don't have singing school, all the things that they do together. And just this is these happy golden years is the name of the last book. You can see eventually that really do get together and at the very end get married. But there were 2 things I wanted to read, and it's about Pa and his fiddle and how that affected Laura particularly. So just 2 little things. When it's an evening at night, around their house, it's just the family. No Almanzo, no anybody else, just the family. By then, by the way, they have forgotten. Maybe I should. Okay. The dusk was deepening, the land flattened, and in the clear air above it, the large stars hung low, while the fiddle sang a wandering song of its own. Then Pa said, "Here's one for you girls," and softly he sang with the fiddle. Golden years are passing by, happy golden years, passing on the wings of time, these happy golden years. Call them back as they go by, sweep their memories are. Oh, improve them as they fly, these happy golden years. Laura's heart ached as the music floated away and was gone in the spring light under the stars. And then one more time, well, I'm sure you played with fiddle a lot, but one time right before Laura is getting married, maybe the night before or 2 nights before, there's another part here about Pa and his fiddle. And it's interesting how the description kind of reviews all the things that have happened to the family, or a lot of them anyway. And it's the first word is it. When they say it, they're talking about the fiddle, it. It sang the songs that Laura knew in the big woods of Wisconsin, and the tunes that Pa had played by the campfires all across the plains of Kansas. It repeated the nightingale's song remembered the days in the dugout in the banks of Palm Creek and the winter evenings in the new house that Pa had built there. It sang of the Christmas on Silver Lake and of springtime after the long, hard winter. Then the fiddle sounded a sweeter note, and Pa's deep voice joined in singing. Which is pretty clever. You did not notice that he's been singing himself. Just, I wish I really knew all the tunes, but maybe somebody here will burst into tune on the song. Okay, here we go. Just a song at twilight. Just a song at twilight. When the lights are evening shadows, softly come and go. Those are being weary, sad the day still to us So anyway, I just told you about the 8 main stories. Just for those who remember, there was also a story about Almanzo that she wrote called Farmer Boy. And there was a book that came out after she died called The First 4 Years about her first 4 years of married life. So anyway, they counted them as a little. Of course, when I was little, I couldn't read it because I was little before 1970. Okay, so let's see, I'm gonna let you get a chance to say what you got out of the story. I think it's a lot about family and how important family is, about how overcoming adversity, which they did very well. Pa was always white, not always probably, but white. Like I remember there's one little story about one of the plagues. It was the plague of crows that came and wiped out the crops. So Pa goes out with his gun, scaring him away, and he comes back at night with a bunch of dead crows. And he said, well, we might have lost all our crops, but we have meat for dinner, or something like that. So you see, they're kind of looking in the seriously like that. I don't know about that. But anyway, but still overcoming adversity, a positive outlook in general. And that life, even if it's difficult, could be really good. And I did talk to quite a few other people about these books. And they said similar things: self-sufficiency, positive outlook, family, meeting challenges. And I always asked them what their favorite book was. And it's kind of interesting. Everybody had different favorite books. So that figured, I suppose. But they didn't all go for the one I did. And that someone even chose, and this was a woman, she chose Farmer Boy. Oh, well, that's interesting. Okay, and I want to read you before we stop and let you get a chance to talk and tell me maybe your favorite book, or if you thought the books had any influence on your later life, or anything you want to say about it. This is a quote that Laura made, and it's really a quote about Pa and his fiddle. It says, Laura Ingalls Wilder attributed, quote, whatever religion, romance, and patriotism I have to the violin and my father playing it in the twilight. That comes through in the book. So maybe we could have people have a chance to say something.